Good morning, everybody. Are we all ready to go? Here we go. Well, good morning. Let me put this horn away. And that is what is the name of that song for today? It's an old classic, and I hope you get it because it's $100 million. Now, last week I played a song, and the winner was Robert Flint. He guessed the name of that song was Nature Boy. So congratulations. I'll send you the IOU in the mail for $100 million. And I don't have sound effects here, so I should do it this way. I will put the I'll put the IOU in the mail for $100 million. This is cheap visual effects and sound effects. Anyway, congratulations, Robert. And by the way, that song was written by Eden Ahab, or Ahabez. I'm murdering it. It's Eden Abez. It's an unusual name. He wrote it in 1947, and Nat King Cole is the one that made it the hit. It was number one for a while in the States. Listen to this. I just want to say this because this is really nice. The gist of the song is that this guy is looking for kind of a truth. And at the end, he says, the greatest thing there is to love and to be loved in return. Isn't that great? I mean, that's really a high-level realization of life there. So anyway, so much for that. And remember this tune that I played, I'll tell you the history of it for next week. So see if you can guess that tune. Now, we have a whole bunch of patrons, and I really appreciate you guys. So I'm going to announce you. But if you're not announced or you haven't been announced, you got to write to me. You can go on my website, The Real Ron Miscavige, and there's a way you can contact me, so let me know. But anyway, right now, let's call out the ones who have donated, and that's John Prius, $1. Thank you very much, John. Jacob M. Whitehead, $1 also. Thank you very much, Jacob. And then Sean AMRI Dixon, also $1. Thank you very much. Then we have Zoltan. Christ, I can't even read my own writing. Zoltan. Okay, Zoltan, you know who you are. I can't read your last name here. $3. Thank you very much. I apologize for that. And then we have Marie Ritchie, $20. Thank you very much. I wonder if this is Henny Ritchie's wife. Because, Henny, if you're watching, thank you very much. And maybe I'll be talking to you one of these days. I didn't lose your phone number. And then we have Julie Fabio, $5. Thank you very much, Julie. And then Michael Doriv, $1. Thank you very much, Michael. And if I murdered any of your names, please accept my apology. I sincerely do thank you because this is all helpful to me to keep this thing going. Any of you who want to become a patron, please do so. I appreciate it. And right away you become a contributor or participant rather than just a spectator or somebody who's being enlightened. I think you'd feel better if you did it. Just try it out. See what you think. So now, that takes care of the business for now. Let me put that on the side. I have a special guest this morning. I spoke to him at length a couple of nights ago, and it could have gone on a lot longer. But this guy has quite an adventure, and I really welcome him to the show. He was a longtime Scientologist. Now he's a free man. He's escaped, and his name is Chuck Beatty. I'm sure a lot of you know him. He's probably more famous than he gives himself credit for because he's a treasure house of information and inside skinny of different aspects and times of Scientology. So, good morning, Chuck, and thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Ron. I have to really give it back to you. You're a whole new new era, and I hope a lot of people get attracted to be interviewed by you for the long span of Scientology that you were involved in, because and I hope more people do get interviewed by you, because there's just a whole bunch of history that needs to be sort of laid out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Anyway, listen, as normal, what we would normally do, start out with telling the interviewee telling how he got in Scientology. That's always of interest to me because I had my own story, which was quite unique, and I know you have a unique one too. So why don't we start off with that, Chuck? Okay.
Sure. So I was pretty much non-religious. I was pretty much an atheist. I was going to Arizona State University, and once you get up, I had accumulated enough credits to get up to my second to last year in college of the 4 years, and I suddenly had a crisis of career. Like, what was I going to be? What was my major going to be? I was stuck in philosophy and political science. I realized I pretty much didn't have the smarts to be really either, I had some unrealistic goals in life. I probably would have been better suited to just becoming, going through college, getting a small bureaucrat's job, possibly in Phoenix City. I was in Phoenix at the time, going to Arizona State University. I was working a 45-hour-a-week job, so my days were totally packed between job and then university, and I was taking full credits. I had my schedule totally packed. It was just like jam-packed all day long. I didn't really have too much free time to do much else than go to school and work. And then unfortunately, that was the age of a lot of hallucinogenic drugs, which are complete felonies today to take. But anyways, they were the fad in the late 60s, early 70s. So I thought it would be a good idea to try to jog my crisis of choice of what to do in life. So I took a bunch of hallucinogenic drugs, the ones that are felonies, that are not recommended to do.
Yeah.
And I had, you have these cosmic experiences, these just mind transcendent hallucinogenic experiences. But anyway, so that sort of steered me in the way of the alternative sort of practices. The stuff that was going on at that time was Carlos Castaneda books, and particularly the one part of the book which is called Flying, which essentially that you fly out of your body. It's basically a hallucination. That's what I've concluded to this day. But there still was question about this idea that flying out of your body was you as the soul that you are.
Yeah.
Ejecting out of your body. That's a very powerful sort of hallucination and conception. Anyway, so I basically centered on that. And then towards the end of May of 1975, when the semester was over, that's when I decided, okay, because every summer I always take either college and I thought, okay, so I accidentally bought a whole bunch of illegal hallucinogenic drugs, chose not to take them, and chose instead to just get into Scientology, because at universities, they always have these guest lecturers that come in to sort of spur the kids on, the college students onto the various sort of like fields in life to research or get into. And one of the fields that there was a neurophysiologist guy, a former neurophysiologist, really brainy guy named John Lilly, who went really off the deep end in hallucinogenics along the lines of Timothy Leary, and also studying into dolphins. Brains of dolphins and stuff. So he had a kind of an interesting path. But anyways, during his lecture, at the question and answer part of the lecture, one of the students asked him, said, "Hey, what are some of the groups that you think are good to stay in? And he said, no, let me do it the other way around. Let me tell you the 15 groups to stay out of. So Scientology was even not recommended by John Lilly, who himself was pretty alternative,
Yeah.
really alternative field. So I was madly writing down all 15 of the groups to stay away from. So then during the summer, I called up Scientology, and they were so easy to get into, and they play upon they flatter you and do the love bombing and get you in there. So I went in there, so that's pretty much the draw. I was a philosophic student, and I wasn't really, in hindsight today, you realize you got to do a lot of reading and a lot of study in life to really grasp all the things that have gone on in human history. It's not just 4 years of college. You really have to do lifelong learning, adult education after you've completed college, and continue learning to really expand and really understand all of human history if you're interested. And I kind of was.
Yeah, I'll tell you something, Chuck. I believe that a person should study his entire life. That's my own opinion, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you can always learn something new and expand your horizons, your way of thinking and everything, and your take on what's actually happening in life itself. I'm for that.
For sure. I mean, anyways, yeah, of course. That's, so that's what the big lure was, possibly, when you did at that time, the introductory Scientology courses. Phoenix, Oregon was downtown. It was a tiny little place, I think it was an old like hairdresser's shop, 2 floors. The bottom was, you walk into reception, and they usually don't have people walking in and say, hey, I want to find out all about Scientology.
No, that's for sure.
So I was a walk-in that was interested, which is unusual. Usually people have a ruin who a friend of theirs hooks them into Scientology in some way.
Yeah.
Me, I was a total walk-in, and I was there for the possibility that Scientology had something to do and it had this anyways, I was, even though it was like a pretty shabby place and people were all not like today, they weren't in uniforms. It was all a really casual atmosphere. It's a lot of love bombing, like being nice to you and stuff like that. And there were people there that even like Russ Williams was the main course supervisor at that time.
Absolutely new.
He's a brain. I mean, there's a lot of really smart, talented people that were in Scientology, and so it makes it seem like, wow, there's a lot of smart people here.
Yeah.
And then Hubbard's books were scattered everything. The OEC, which then became later on, as the years rolled on, my interest and kind of like my focus of expertise in Scientology. The OEC volumes, those 8 green volumes, which have all the administrative do's and don'ts of Scientology, they were on the shelf there within the first couple of minutes. I was glancing around, looking at all the books. A lot of the books that were like little cheap, sort of like come on books. It didn't really interest me, but I was more interested that the place was so meticulously kind of still organized. You had a reception, you had the register office.
Yep.
You had all these offices, and everybody seemed to have their distinct post and position. And I just asked so many questions, like, I don't know if when you go into an org for the very first time, you go through this whole routine. They're running a routine on you in the background. You don't realize that.
Oh, yeah.
And at that time, they didn't have the Department of Special Affairs, which is sort of like their FBI and dirty tricks department, but they're associated with every single one of the churches of Scientology today, wherever. And I don't consider them entirely a church. They have an argument for being a church, but I don't totally agree. But anyways, when you walk in there as a total newbie walk-in, within the first 3 days, I saw that this was a very organized activity. It was multi-echelon. You see the big bridge chart, the big step ladder of what you're going to do. There's the training courses on one side. You to train to be the actual practitioner of Scientology. So they try to shuffle you into getting it in your head. You're going to be a practitioner of this stuff. Now, that put me off. I got to tell you, I wasn't totally attracted to becoming the practitioner. I mean, it seemed like a little bit too much of a stepladder. I'm there for like the wisdom, the ideas about the soul that might, I was there to get like a couple of books that had the key chapters that had the ideas about the soul, which kind of interested me at the time, or to expand on these concepts of how could you eject out of your head? How is that even conceivable?
Yeah.
How are we as this conscious self that we are able to not, transmigrate, go lifetime to lifetime and all that. That kind of interested me at that time. So that's kind of the lure. And then so I did the introductory courses, and right there, right smack dab in their introductory book, Scientology Fundamentals of Thought, in the Parts of Man chapter, and later on in life, I probably read those key lines which interested me, that had something to do with the soul and the relationship of the soul and the body.
Right.
Scientology's views. That's truly the glue that pretty much kept me there my whole career. Up until the very, very end of Scientology, I pretty much adhered to the concept of the soul, and that Scientology was this practice. I mean, I can almost sound like a disseminating Scientologist. I can go into that role. I don't believe it now, and I think there's so many other, obviously, there's 8 or 10 really nasty things about Scientology, which, there could be the philosophy of Scientology, which you're interested in, and then there's the nasty stuff that you want to stay away from. And you get warned of that. You get warned of that by almost everybody within your first couple of weeks of being in Scientology. You're gonna hear all the warnings, and it's difficult to take those warnings to heart and realize that those people are right.
I know.
The people that tell you 30 years ago, stay away from Scientology. I went to a book. And I'll tell you a whole bunch of other stuff that happened right in the first 2 weeks. I was a college student, and I was a bit of a nerd, so I went straight to the college library after class, because I'm going to university still. I'd still decided to take some university courses during the. Oh no, maybe that and there's two different like summer shifted periods, and I gave myself about a month and a half to study Scientology at the university library while I wasn't doing any courses, but I was gonna be going to school again that next fall, so I still had access to their library. So I went through at that time there was no internet, of course, in '75, the summer of '75. So I went to the periodical indexes, started methodically in 1950, started reading every single newspaper and magazine article critical of Scientology. And I found it all justified sort of editorial views, correct, and even correct to this day, but they didn't give me enough of the meat of Scientology. So I kept being stuck trying to go back to Scientology, trying to okay, give me the meat. Yeah. Let's hear your, what do you believe? And then as everyone has criticized Scientology, including all the good reporters and anyone who's done any kind of research, Hubbard, it's like Big Long Con. He just dribbles stuff out to you. You get this sort of, it's called a mystery sandwich. You give people just a little bit, and then you draw them along. It's just a bait and switch. You give them whatever they think that they need, and that they'll get that from Scientology, and then they pull you along. So they never get down to summarizing what it is. So that's an extremely frustrating thing. And then if you yourself, if you're a person interested in anything which Scientology thinks they can sell you, they'll pull you along on that forever.
Well, let me tell you something, Chuck. When you a few minutes ago, when you said you saw all these books and you saw this bridge and all of the courses that you had to do to become a trained practitioner, I think the fact that everything is laid out that methodically and supposedly accurately as to go up this bridge, people look at that and they think this has got to be legitimate, because look, it's all in writing, exactly what you get. And I think that has a tendency to make people think it's a legitimate way to achieve what I would call spiritual freedom or a better life in this universe in which we live. And it's not true, though. That doesn't lead you down those lines. I mean,
unfortunately, yes. There's not what normally happens. Like, also prior, if we go just prior to my actual decision, the day that I walked into Scientology the first time, I had 3 different groups on my list. I called one, I couldn't get through. They were only open on Thursdays. I called the other, they were there. It was a guru place. And from where I lived in Phoenix, I got in my car. I went to the guru place first because it
Wow.
was closer. You know, it did sort of the Google Maps. You choose the first destination. So I went into the guru place, and guess what? No reception. I could hear them humming, and I heard this sort of bad smell. I mean,
Jeez.
this was a communal guru place, and they're humming, and I didn't. It sounded a little bit sleazy. I walk upstairs, and all the people are in this room, sort of humming and chanting. And I go like, there wasn't anybody at receptionist to sort of take my interest, you know, because I was like one of these spur of the moment walk-ins, but you know, the lead up to the actual spur of the moment, there was quite a lot. I've
yeah.
really gone over all the crap that was going on in my head that led up to it. So I turned around and walked out of the guru place, got back in my car, walked, and then drove over to the Scientology place. And then, of course, man, they jump on you right
I
there.
know.
They don't let you go away. You walk in that door, man, they got you. And then later on in my further years that we may or may not get into because I talk so much, unfortunately, those green volumes that you see the first time you walk into a Scientology facility, and they show on display the red volumes and the green volumes. In the green volumes, which I later became an expert of during my career as positions in the movement, they pretty much, once you walk in that door, they're gonna like grab onto you, and they have like they don't want to let you go. And then I want to do a shout out. There's a recent, all these young people, they challenge each other to try to go into Scientology and see what happens. There's this Reckless Ben series of videos. Man, that proves the point of what I just told you.
Yeah.
They don't want to let you go once you walk in there. And there was that other one, Carrie and Ross. They did a podcast on going into Scientology. Same thing. You have to be a pretty sharp person to outwit them to get yourself back out once you get in there.
Yep, that's a true statement. And by the way, though, that OEC stands for Organizational Executive Course, correct?
Correct. And
the
truly,
red
those
volumes, the red volumes are
none of the staff ever study in full.
The red volumes are what's called the technical volumes, and that's the technology of Scientology.
Now, I personally, unfortunately, I think the critics, the long ago critics from day one, they didn't believe that Scientology's, L. Ron Hubbard's wordage was truly, didn't really capture what the subject does in relationship to all the other subjects that have gone on in human history. And I tend to agree with the harshest critics. And one of the descriptions of Scientology is that it's a pseudotherapy. So the red volumes treat you to be the pseudotherapists. And then the bridge is the series of pseudotherapy procedures and commands, which the auditing is basically the Scientology pseudotherapy, in my opinion. And you learn to be the pseudotherapist so that you can either do it with somebody else, just like it says in the Dianetics book, which is basically an alternative prenatal trauma talk therapy, which they did minus using the Hubbard polygraph,
right?
A Ouija board machine. But the bridge basically is like that. The red would be the whole red side, and then the training side is the bridge is pretty much everything that you're going to study in the red volumes. And they're really high level practitioners. You have to give those people a lot of praise. You've had on some people don't appreciate Karen De La Care. She is just unbelievable. She's staggering. She's like one of a kind. She should being interviewed, I think, by religious movement academics far more than she is. She just is. She is beyond a gold mine of history of the movement.
Oh yes, listen, I have her on this program quite frequently, and she is one of the favorite guests of our viewers, and just hands down. I mean, she's brilliant. I just got to tell you straight out, and her take on it is very incisive, very cutting edge.
She's a class 12. People don't understand even what she is. She's a class 12. There's 12 levels of the pseudo therapist in Scientology. She's the top. And then above that, there are what are called the case supervisors. For each one of the therapy levels of Scientology, there's a case supervisor who's the person who reviews every single session that's delivered between a auditor or the pseudo-therapist and the receiver of the pseudotherapy, which is one of the paid mainline services of the Scientology church facilities. You go in there and you plop down your money, because you don't get to begin the pseudotherapy unless you plop down the money in these for 12 and a half hours. You can only buy them in 12 and a half hours. Once you paid enough money for 12 and a half hours, you can start. But they generally try to get you to buy these packages, which cost thousands to tens of thousands of dollars. And when I got in, and like probably you got in even earlier, it was far cheaper. You could probably get the whole shebang done back then for just between $10,000 and $15,000. It would be inconceivable today.
Chuck, it was less than that, because I was visiting out in California, and the person it was the bathroom. There was an old magazine back from the 70s. And I looked at the prices in those days, and for about $5,000, you could go all the way to OTA.
Yeah, so it's truly a different field. Yeah. When you interview those people that did it in that day,
yeah.
Have you've heard of a man named Roger Weller?
Of course.
Please interview Roger Weller. He has, if he's willing, he has truly had some. He's almost like, I don't know if you've heard of George Plimpton. There are these people that bump into other people in other fields. Roger Weller could write 2 or 3 books about his life. He's just had such a fascinating life. But he was there, and he rubbed elbows with so many of the people that were temporarily, for short periods of time, lured into Scientology, flattered into being a Scientologist and receiving the auditing, the pseudotherapy, and getting up to a certain couple levels before they quit. Mm-hmm. Roger went through it all. I believe he got all the way up to OT8, and he has probably one of the most fascinating recipient, like a follower, who did the whole chart from bottom to top. He had a fascinating life. And also he's in his 70s, and he truly needs to be if he would be. He's just got so many adventures that he received in his life. Anyways,
wait, Chuck, hang on. Do you know him personally?
Yes, of course. I will tell him he needs to. You need to interview him.
Good. I'll tell you what. When the show is over, we'll hang on for a second, and I want to take his contact points down, or just go ahead and contact him and tell him to contact me. Okay?
Oh, for sure. George White. You did George White.
Yes.
George White, I think, is one of the most significant long-term Scientologists to ever, to this date, provide so much crucial history. I can't say enough about your interviewing George White. And some of the things he says, I mean, Ron, there's so many people that I would really love for you to interview. Anyways, I could drop names all day, but let's go ahead and.
Yeah, just remember at the end of the show, don't hang up on me right away. We'll just give me his contact points or whatever. Anyway, let's continue on with this though, because this is important stuff that these people who were around in those days give their take on it, because it has morphed into something that I guess it was built into the DNA to begin with, but it never came to fruition to the extent it is today. It's gone from what was supposedly a help you group or help man, and now into help me. In other words, give Scientology all your money, and they give you a piece of paper on it that says you're a great guy. And this is what it's turned into.
I have a really detailed, different take, which takes so long to explain. I hate to get in there, and I almost jump off of telling my whole history that led up to the conclusions I've come to about Scientology. I think Hubbard was personally, if you look at the whole history of Scientology, there's been a lot of really good books written about it. Right. Roy Wallace, he was a UK academic. He was doing his doctorate, and he first did his paper on Scientology over there as part of his doctorate. And his book is called, what is it called? The Road to Total Freedom. It's an excellent book from, I think he makes about a half a dozen entirely correct conclusions. One of them is that pretty much Hubbard developed a whole sort of like bureaucracy of Scientology behind the scenes as a series of solutions to keeping this ongoing practice, sales practice of selling the auditing, selling his books, selling his lectures, and then the bureaucracy that developed around it is pretty much keeping it going. And Hubbard even himself, I lived through the period of what when he was still alive, he was writing. I never met him, of course, but in my years as a course supervisor at Flag, I personally took. You couldn't continue to exist on those in the positions that you are. When I was a training supervisor at Flag in Clearwater, during those years of I was first on the TTC training to be a practitioner at Flag. That's when I bumped into people like Karen De La Care, who was unbelievably kind and gracious and would chat with us neophyte, beginner Sea Org members who were trying to become, do the training called the Technical Training Program group of people who later only of, I think of 100 of us who started, I think only 3 made it to up to the, I think only 2 made it to class 12 out of 100. It is a very long, difficult weeding out of the process. A lot of people who then go on to other jobs within the movement. But there was also the lure that you were going to become a class 12. That was what I was lured into joining the Sea organization later, after I did about 8 months of Scientology courses in Phoenix. Then one day one of the executives at the Phoenix org had received one of those orders, because, as we know, the average public doesn't realize there's these very discrete, well-run echelons of Scientology above the local missions or orgs that are in the city. There's also the Continental Regional Office, and the Continental Regional Office had received an order from the top manager of Scientology to that LRH, because when LRH was alive, his orders down into the movement were taken. They were the utmost, they were the things that all the staffs in the orgs, whenever an LRH order came down and was received by telex, because they used telex machines at the time, everything else was dropped, and that LRH order became the priority.
Yeah.
So the priority at that time in late 75, when the Apollo, the vessel, which was just landing from the Caribbean, where it was last sailing in the Caribbean, it had come across from the Mediterranean as Janice Grady. And Janice Grady's books are just crucial for experts of Scientology history to read. And they truly are, in my opinion, Janice Grady's 2 books so far, and I hope she does 3 or 4 more, are truly some of the best on the spot around L. Ron Hubbard for the years she covered. They're unprecedented in their detail, and there's so many little leads off of her books that could be gone into. I mean, some people consider, I'd have to say all the time, Scientology is just a total quack subject, and just don't waste your moments on it. Okay, fine. But if you're going to be an expert on it, you got to read Janice Grady's books. And truly, I mean, you have to read the books of all the other mainline people. Leah Remini's book. I love Leah Remini's audio book. I love your book. Your Jenna Miscavige's book is just brilliant as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of books to read on Scientology. But anyways, I've read them all. I'm kind of like, in that sense, a cheerleader and an expert of all of the history that everybody's written in their books, because I try to piece it together with everything else I've known. I mean, I can listen to pretty much anybody who's ever been in Scientology for hours. They can tell me anything, and it doesn't get old on me, because I can immediately understand it because of my role as when I was an initial administrative training supervisor in my first years in Scientology. In the course room, you're dealing with the students who are sitting there doing individual study, like a Scientology course room. I don't think has been properly also publicly laid out for people, but Anyways, as you can see, I go all over the place in these interviews.
No,
Sorry, Ron.
that's all right. No, that's okay. But we were talking about, and I said that I thought in the beginning it was kind of a self help, and it morphed into just a money making racket. Like, as a matter of fact, there's a course called the St. Hill Special Briefing Course. It's no longer even offered as a course. So these things that supposedly were going to help you in the early days were just kind of pushed to the side. And the main thing now is donating to become a higher status in some, like the International Association of Scientologists. See, I'll tell you, I have a simple take.
I think there's a reason for what
Chuck,
you just said.
hang on.
And I
No,
believe the answer
Chuck,
to the reason.
Chuck, hang on a second, please. Just let
Yeah.
me finish, and I'll let you go. I have a very simple take on it, and I could be entirely wrong, and that's why I like to hear other people's take. And my take is this: in the beginning, it's true. L. Ron Hubbard did want to make a lot of money out of starting a religion. I believe that is totally true. But then what he would do is promise things to people that he thought were desirable, that they would like to achieve, but then he thought, I'll promise it, then I'll figure out how to deliver it later. And that was his undoing, because these things that he promised, he never fulfilled. Like, I never met one person in 42 years who could exteriorize from their body and, go out a distance and read a book or something. And then it's just over the years, it went the way of something that has a rotten core in it, and it's to the point now where you don't want to be associated with it at all, because it's going to ruin your life. That's my take.
It is truly so voluminous. Chris Shelton, as you know, has done close to 100 to 200 interviews, and he's done a lot of interviews with academics who've helped bring a lot of really important insight into L. Ron Hubbard himself, and John Attack, who has, he did so much of the research. There's so many people that have really helped lay out Hubbard's life. And then, of course, for well-educated people, there's Lawrence Wright's Going Clear book, which takes a high altitude view of Hubbard, which is absolutely correct. But when you get down to L. Ron Hubbard, he was such a prolific writer. He wrote so much stuff. And because he built a bureaucracy, it gets people involved in these positions that are holding together the bureaucracy to get the auditing delivered. That I remember, I know a lot of people today don't have a high opinion of Marty Rathbun due to him turning to be a rat and being critical of Mike Rinder and being Leah Remini. But if one can hold one's criticism of Marty off so that one goes back and just selects out the important little nuggets of history, which can be corroborated, which Marty details, and he was luckily in a position where Marty had a lot of insight about what was going on behind the scenes. And I myself, when I moved on to different positions, I read some of the same L. Ron Hubbard orders that came to Marty, and I remember Marty. He was referred to as Marty. Hubbard, in his final years, when he talked about people doing different things, he always relate to KK, Marty, Mark. Elrich would use first names for people, and sometimes their nicknames and stuff like that in his advices to him. But anyway, so one of the things that Marty says about the final years of Hubbard, I think are totally accurate and correct. What was happening? Hubbard was on the super defensive. Mary Sue had gone to jail. She pretty much took the bullet for him. He should have gone to jail if the feds had really brought him to, had gone all the way and gotten him, and instead of just being the unindicted co-conspirator to the orders which Mary Sue, as the controller and the guardian, executed and got her guardian's office guys to go do all this illegal stuff, for which about, it was 10 or 11 of them all were charged and actually found guilty, and then they did varying degrees of jail time for all the illegal activities. That was his wife. There was no question that in anyone's mind that was up to that level of the guardian's office that he was complicit or gave the orders. She was briefing him on all this stuff. And not only that, for true experts of Scientology who've studied the policy, the Simon Bolivar policy in particular, which are the one of the phrase Hubbard uses is used in the administrative bureaucracy is the marching orders. The marching orders policy of Mary Sue was the Simon Bolivar. And then the Manuela relationship to Bolivar in history, Hubbard pretty much gave Mary Sue the Manuela hat to her Bolivar, to her husband Hubbard. And she did do that. So therefore, all of the nefarious, illegal, and frankly, so despicable that it's carried forward to this day is pretty much all on Hubbard. It's always all on Hubbard, no matter what.
He was the one behind the entire government attack. There's no doubt about it.
One of these phrases in life is called paint yourself into a corner.
Yeah.
Well, Hubbard painted himself into a corner with his massive, prolific, detailed bureaucracy in all his little departments that he had self-running. Today, what we have running is the Hubbard bureaucracy.
Yeah.
It truly, I have a little bit bigger blame to be put on the writings of Hubbard, his massive tomes, those green volumes that impressed me walking in the door. There's a lot of really bad stuff in the corpus writings, the administrative corpus of the Scientology echelon system, which are driving the Office of Special Affairs today, which will never cease to exist. There's just too much policy holding them in place. So when we look at when you really take the full minutia to the highest level views of Scientology, the darned bureaucracy that Hubbard wrote, and which is still guiding them behind the scenes, in that almost all staff, like they're badgered. And you remember being badgered to do your study. When you're in the SEWARD, you go put in your 2.5 hours so that you get your 12.5 hours study a week. Yeah. So you're always studying your full hat. Your full hat has, and then it's so meticulously laid out. You do your clay demos on what are your valuable final product for your job, your statistics. I was in that administrative training department. My goal was to make everybody a perfect little cult bureaucrat. So that's how I reviewed my position, and I became my career ended me up being like, hope everybody succeeds. And I was truly, just to jump to the end of my life, my goal was to work as a helper in the think tank, in the exec strata. I truly understood that. I was deluded as a cult bureaucrat trainer to believe that our solutions to all of our problems, as Hubbard says in the policies over and over, were to apply more of his policies. So I became an expert of all the stupid, every little potential reference that could be pulled from Hubbard's vast amount of writings. Like those 7 volumes are only like that. I mean, that's not even that much. Another person you should really put on, another person is Dan Garvin. You got to do Dan Garvin. Dan Garvin was one of the Mimeophiles bosses in the Mimeophiles. And then that's the other thing that impressed me due to my background. My father was a U.S. Army 30-year career man in the sort of like the administrative bureaucracy part of the U.S. Army. In the military service, you may know this, the MOS, your military
occupational
specialty.
Yeah, MOS.
His MOS was clerk. He was a chief warrant officer. He did 30 years of being an expert clerk of the military hardware around the world. And I grew up on Army bases, so I was totally impressed with large organizations. And I think that was another thing that sort of unfortunately grabbed me about Scientology. It looked like, wow, these guys might be pretty meticulous. They got all these books, they got this chart, they got all this stuff. This stuff is kind of impressive. Kind of like fit in with like how you gonna run a group. You got to have this organized sort of like military base type of outlook towards everything, and like keep everything ship shape and all that kind of stuff. And then you sort of efficiently move people through their little routines and checklists and everything like that. So I was kind of like that kind of a minded Scientologist, Sea Org member my whole career. So that's why even to this day, I still, unfortunately, can get pulled into virtually any little nook and cranny of the whole Scientology movement's history. I'm sort of drawn to try to understand it and put it into perspective with the whole Hubbard schema of the whole big long thing. So that's why I truly am interested in the people that I think that have lived in different parts of the Scientology movement to do their books, to do their videos, get interviewed, at least put the history out there. And then, of course, should the movement exist or not exist? That's those are some tough questions, and those should be left for another time, I guess.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you something. As you go on with this, and this is a hell of an analogy, but I got to say it because I just thought of it. You're trained to do all these things. You're keeping people nose down into becoming better bureaucrats. You could almost be called as Red Skelton. You remember the Red Skelton?
Yeah, of course.
You could almost be called the mean little kid.
Mean little kid.
You remember
what
that?
did he do? Did he like?
No,
did
no. He was.
everybody
Here's what would
all the
happen.
rules?
No, here's what would happen. He'd start telling a story, and all of a sudden he'd cry, and he says, "I scared myself." There was almost like no rhyme or reason to the stories that he told, but he ended up being called the mean little kid. And when you think about it, you doing all these things, there really was no rhyme or reason to it as far as it being a survival activity. But nevertheless,
Class 12 was the boss. Class 12, sitting down, doing the L rundowns, getting the receiver of the pseudotherapy, Class 12 L rundowns, 10, 11, 12, getting somebody to soul eject. Because Hubbard, and that's why the criticism, the bait and switch criticism against Scientology, that it's a con, is so valid. But on the other hand, I have to give you an additional detail. When you said you never met anybody that had ever exteriorized, I unfortunately repeatedly, when you're truly searching to find those people, they are there. Otto Roos, the one who, in a recent Chris Shelton's expert interviews with John Atek. John Atek is just a fount of so much more information. He interviewed Otto Roos, and Otto Roos told him about auditing Otto, because Otto was basically the David Mayo of the late 1968,
right,
and I think early 69 period. Otto Roos was like sort of a larger than life tech person. He was sort of like a Rambo David Mayo. Okay, he was a guy who could do the ship stuff, and he was a class 8, and a class 8 was as high as it got at that time. And then just before the L rundowns were being developed, I believe Mary Sue complained to Hubbard that Scientology was all a con. This is what it needs to be like, I think possibly written about more, and I hope to heck Otto Roos. If you could get Otto Roos on, that would be something else.
No. Listen, I think Otto Roos is dead.
Oh, that's sad. That's sad.
Yeah.
Because he was such a strong believer. Now, what's on the internet, and I've unfortunately, since leaving Scientology when I left in 2003, because of my interest in all of the little holes in the history that I didn't know, I went and there's just endless people that are truly interested in the fine point details of Scientology's history, constantly sharing the links to all of the various things. There's a great graduation ceremony, I think in 1960. It's either I think it's January or February 1969. Otto talks. He gives his win, at a typical Friday night student graduation, like the graduations they hold at Flag today in Clearwater.
Right.
Where you get up and you give your spiel. It's a lot more artificial today. The graduation speeches given by students back then were like all over the place, and people would say all kinds of crazy stuff. But Otto talked about being exterior, doing the then version of OT5, and being several hundred feet or 1,000 feet up above the Apollo, looking down at the lights of the ship, and so Otto was truly a true believer, and he had the exteriorization experience on the old OT5, which a lot of people don't have the exteriorization experience, like you say. The people who did are few, very few and far between, and that's another thing that I'm hoping Chris Shelton will do. We'll do an interview with another outside professional psychologist, neurophysiologist, or, some academic who will go over how hallucination of being out of the body is probably the the real way that it is. We basically, some people are able to imagine that they are uh, distant from their body because so many of the, as far as the reading that I've done, so many of the incidents of people being out of the body don't match up with the people that were in the room who credibly list, no, there wasn't that in the room at the time the person said that they were up in the corner looking down on the operating table. That people our minds are plastic enough, and we can convince ourselves that we're out of the body when we really aren't. So I think that's probably the actual, I mean, I'm a total skeptic, and I do believe it hard that we don't actually leave the body. But there were a sufficient number of people who had the out of the body experience in Scientology's history. And then another very famous one was one of the pseudo therapists at London Org back, when LRH was moving around the world,
Right.
giving lectures in London, giving lectures in Washington, D.C., back and forth. I forget what the man's name. I think his name is Stevenson or something like that. But again, online, I was on the chat sites for a full year before I went public, and got up the courage to share my name in 2004. Say, hi, I'm Chuck Beatty. I'm finally, going to talk on the internet, because at that time in 2004, not a lot of people, except the really, really great older generation critics, they were the ones who were open with their names. They pretty much I just followed suit and followed along with the earlier critics. I think you've come along. You're kind of like of that generation that you wouldn't even have considered of being an anonymous
No.
contributor to the chat sites. So it's a kind of a personality thing. Some people don't care. Some people care. Some people don't want to have the backlash onto their family lives or onto their careers that they've started since getting out of Scientology, so they'll remain anonymous. Everybody's reaction to how to come out of Scientology and how to talk about it, that's completely valid. Whatever people choose. I mean, I'm a completely open-minded, let persons do whatever they wish. But anyways, Otto Roos, he, and then this earlier man in Stevenson, they are two significant persons. And then there are enough other people that had the exteriorization experience. Now, I think that if this truly needs to be researched more, and it's probably already been researched, it's just a lack of any of us ex-members who are interested in the exteriorization process to really look into it sufficiently to find out that it's already been researched. It's pretty much conclusive. There's a certain number of people that are drawn to various types of spiritual, religious, alternative groups who have had the out-of-the-body experience. And even, I have to tell you one last thing about the out-of-the-body experience. Another thing that it was both the lure that got me into Scientology, and it was the hope that finally disintegrated for me, which was probably the reason why I left. What happens is, when you're not achieving your goals in Scientology, when you're not getting what you want out of it, and when you see so many people quitting, and that's another experience that is so disheartening when you're in Scientology.
No kidding.
From day one, when I joined, within the first 3 to 6 months at Flag in Clearwater, here were all these Apollo veterans quitting.
Yeah.
The brain drain on the class 12s, so that by 1980, the majority of the class 12s that had trained on the Apollo with Karen, they had I think over 50% of them, and that was a whole major problem. So that was a disheartening factor too. You go like, am I joining a movement that's like disintegrating? But by that time, I didn't want to give up my positive feeling for the exteriorization experience that you're supposed to achieve. And one of the things we talked about off camera was, did you get the idea, Ron, that going exterior was sort of like learning how to ride the bicycle? You go in Scientology, you get up to OT5 like Otto Roos.
Yeah.
You do these little experiences, and you had Jesse Prince on too.
Yeah.
And Jesse Prince has described doing the old OT5, and the old OT5, which is the old secret, method for somehow doing these sort of like drills, which I would equate to learning how to ride a bicycle. Like once you learn how to ride a bicycle, you got it. You know how to ride down the street. There's the moments before you learn how, and then there's the moment that's a sort of balance. And I had that sort of concept in my head that you as a conscious soul that you are, would sort of like learn this balancing act and somehow eject out of your head. That's what I thought exteriorization was going to be. So I held that misconception my own and that's one of the things I learned later in getting out of Scientology. I read this book about how do confidence men work. They pretty much let you provide the false hope, and then they sell you that. They sell you your nice little solid false hope that you hope to get out of the con. And Hubbard, he just stretches it way out.
Yep.
And then nobody gets the goodies. And that's really the sad long range thing. So in the end of the day, that was, I think, probably the largest disappointing, disheartening factor about Scientology. It's a very long con.
You got it, buddy. And I'll tell you, we're actually running out of time right now, studio-wise.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry, because I'm going to have to get you back. There's a lot more things we want to talk about. But let's end off with that. And I think my producer has something to tell me.
We have a super chat from Melissa Payne. Happy Sunday, Ron. Just wanted to say, hi, handsome.
Listen to this. Melissa, thank you very much. What am I going to do with these compliments? I was looking at myself in the mirror the other day for about 3-4 hours. I'm joking. Thanks a lot, Melissa. She's an old listener and an old member of this so-called cult that is, we're trying to do something to change people's minds about the Church of Scientology into something truthful about it, and don't get involved. That's my biggest advice. Just don't get involved. Anyway.
Quit fast.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're in, get out. Just walk out the door. Skip thinking about all the repercussions or what they're going to do. Just walk out. It's that simple. So let me end off with a little bit of a commercial here. And I want to thank all of you who we announced as patrons earlier on the show. And if you have any inclination to help the ongoingness of this, I'd appreciate it if you become a patron. Go to my site, therealronmiscavige.com. It'll show you how to do it there. And if you would share this with all people that you can share it with, I'd appreciate it. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And you should take a look at some of the other shows that I do. I did an interesting one on exercise, and there's a reason I did it, and you'll see once. It's called Home Workouts for Veterans or Anybody. And I did it because I'm interested in my fellow veterans getting some exercise and at a very reasonable rate. This is another issue I have with myself. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran, and I see a lot of the guys my age, like in their 80s, walking around, and they're not in great shape. And I am in pretty good shape because I've exercised, but I found a device that is unbelievably inexpensive and incredibly effective. Anyway, I did a little video. I did 2 videos on that so far, so I'd invite you to watch those and then give me your take on it. Anyway, that's some interesting things that I'm doing, and I appreciate you tuning in and listening to me and my guests that I have on, because these guests they're not going to be here forever. I'm not saying they're going to die tomorrow, but, like 30 or 40 years from now, this will still be on the internet, and people can see this part of history, that there was a group that kind of came into view that was supposed to help people, and it turned out to be one of the biggest cons ever perpetrated on the human race. So we will get together after the show and figure out the next time you can come on, because I definitely want you back to wrap this up. Okay, buddy?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ron.
And I thank you. And
many kudos to you. I couldn't give you enough praise, Ron.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. Anyway, from me and my guests and my producer, I will say I will see you on the next episode. Please stay tuned and have a great day, and God bless all of you. Bye-bye for now.